Okay, so after making the last video and deleting all the other videos, I went into my own personal collection of sci-fi, fantasy, all that fun stuff, and I have found a book that is okay. It was not published in 1923, it was published in 1926, but I looked up to see if it renewed its copyright, and they did not, so the copyright is expired on this, so it is 100% okay to read, and no one's gonna like try to ruin my life over reading it, so awesome. Um, it is a book I always admired because of the ingenuity. Again, this is 1926. Let me really emphasize that, of the author. Ralph Milne Farley, however you enunciate his middle name, and it is called The Radio Planet. I, if I remember correctly, believe this is part of a 3-book series, and I only have this book, The Radio Planet. But it makes a good book in and of its own self. There are a few things about before when he was on Mars before this from the other books, but really you don't need that information to enjoy this book. So without further ado, I'm gonna make good my promise to read something else and start reading this book. There is a foreword by the author, and it goes like this. Could you make a radio set? Don't answer rashly. Don't say that you have already built several, for note that we did not ask whether you could assemble a set from parts already manufactured by others, but rather whether you could build an entire set yourself from ground up. That means making every part you require, including the vacuum tubes, the acid in the batteries, the wires, and the insulation. If you think you could do this, let us ask you one further question. Put yourself in a place of a hero of the following story, and imagine yourself stranded amid intelligent savages who have not progressed beyond the wood age. Under such circumstances, with nothing to guide you but your scientific memory, with no tools except those of your own creation, and with no materials save those furnished by nature, could you, though the lives and happiness of your dear ones depend upon it, could you make a radio set? RMF 1926. Chapter 1. Too bad that Miles Cabot can't see this, I exclaimed as my eyes fell on the following item. Signals from Mars fail to reach Harvard. Cambridge, Massachusetts, Wednesday. The Harvard College radio station has for several weeks been in receipt of fragmentary signals of extraordinarily long wavelength. Professor Hammond announced yesterday, so far as it's been possible to test the direction of the source of these waves, it appears that the direction has a 24-hour cycle, thus indicating the origin of these waves is some point outside of Earth. The university authorities will express no opinion as to whether or not these messages came from Mars. Miles alone of all the radio engineers of my acquaintance was competent to surmount these difficulties, and thus enable the Cambridge savants to receive with clearness the message from another planet. 12 months ago he would have been available, for he was then quietly visiting at my farm, after 5 Earth years spent on the planet Venus, where by the aid of the radio he had led the Cupians to victory over their oppressors, a human-brained race of gigantic black ants. He had driven the last ant from the race of the continental Poros, and had won and wed the Princess Lilla, who had borne him a son to occupy the throne of Cupia. While at my farm, Cabot had rigged up a huge radio set and a matter-transmitting apparatus, with which he had, presumably, shot himself back to Poros on the night of the big October storm which had wrecked his installation. I showed the newspaper item to Mrs. Farley and lamented on Cabot's absence. Her response opened up an entirely new line of thought. Said she, "Doesn't the very fact that Mr. Cabot isn't here suggest to you that this may be a message not from Mars, but from him? Or perhaps from the Princess Lilla, inquiring about him in the case he had failed his attempted return?" That had never occurred to me. Oh, how stupid! What had I better do about it, if anything? I asked. Drop Professor Hammond a line? but Mrs. Farley was afraid that I would be taken for a crank. That evening, when I was over in town, the clerk in the drugstore waylaid me to say that there had been a long-distance phone call for me, and would I please call a certain Cambridge number. So, after waiting an interminable time in the stuffy booth with my hands both full of dimes, nickels, and quarters, I finally got my party. "Mr. Farley?" "Speaking. This is Professor Kellogg, O.D. Kellogg," the voice replied. It was my friend at Harvard Math Faculty, the man who had analyzed the measurements of the streamlined projectile in which Miles Cabot had shot to earth, the account of the first part of his adventures on Venus. Some further adventures Miles had told me in person during his stay on my farm. "Professor Hammond thinks he is getting Mars on the air," the voice continued. "Yes," I replied. "I judged as much from what I read in this morning's paper. But what do you think?" Kellogg's reply gave my sluggish mind the second jolt which it had received that day. "Well," he said, "in view of the fact that I am one of the few people among your readers who take your radio stories seriously, I think that Hammond is getting Venus. Can you run up here and help me try to convince him?" And so it was that I took the early boat next morning for Boston, and had lunch with the two professors. As a result of our conference, a small committee of engineers returned with me to Edgartown that evening for the purpose of trying to repair the wrecked radio set which Miles Cabot had left on my farm. They utterly failed to comprehend the matter-transmitting apparatus, and so after the fallen tower had been re-erected and the rubbish cleared away, they had devoted their attention to the restoration of the conversational part of the set. To make a long story short, we finally restored it, and with the aid of some of the old blueprints of Cabot's, which Mrs. Farley, like the Swiss Family Robinson's wife, produced from somewhere, I was the first to try the earphones, and was rewarded by the faint bizz bizz like a song of the North Woods blackfly. In conversational radioese, I repeated the sounds to the Harvard group. Da dit da dit da da dit da da dit da dit da da dit da da dit da dit da da dit da da dit 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 da dit da dit dit da da dit dit da 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 dit da dit da da dit dit da 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 dit da dit dit da dit dit da 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 da. A look of incredulity spread over their faces. Again came the same message, and again I repeated it. "You're spoofing us," one of them shouted. "Give me the earphones." And he snatched them from my head. Adjusting them on his own head, he spelled out to us, "CQ, CQ, CQ, D Cabot, Cabot, Cabot." Seizing the big leaf switch, he threw it over. The motor generator began to hum. Grasping the key, the Harvard engineer ticked off into space. "Cabot, Cabot, DE." "Has this station a call letter?" he hurriedly asked me. "Yes," I answered quickly. "1XXB. 1XXB," he continued. "The ticking K." Interplanetary communication was an established fact at last. And not with Mars, after all these years of scientific speculations. But what meant more to me was that I was again in touch with my classmate, Miles Standish Cabot, the radio man. The next day, a party of prominent scientists, accompanied by a telegrapher and two stenographers, arrived at my farm. During the weeks that followed, there was recorded Miles's own account of the amazing adventures on the planet Venus, or Poros, as its own inhabitants call it, which befell him upon his return there after his brief visit to Earth. I have edited those notes into the following coherent story. So I will read chapter 2 and another time. And yeah, it's all on Venus. Tricked you.